What does it truly mean to see? Is it merely the function of our eyes, the passive reception of light and shadow, shape and form? Or is it something deeper, an act of the heart as much as the mind? An ability to look past the surface, beyond the uniform, beyond the role someone plays, and recognize the fragile, complex human being within. We live in a world that rushes past people, labeling them, categorizing them, and all too often, dismissing them. We see a soldier, a cleaner, a boss, a subordinate. But how often do we stop, truly stop, and see the person? This is a story about a moment when seeing, really seeing, changed everything. It's a story about a young Marine, a forgotten woman, and a 4-star general who was about to learn the most important lesson of his career, not in a briefing room, but in the heart of chaos. Corporal Leo Vance felt the familiar grit of sand and dust on his teeth, a taste as constant as the relentless sun on the training grounds of Camp Pendleton. He was a ghost in his own unit, a quiet, observant presence in a world that rewarded booming voices and overt aggression. His movements were economical, his words few. His superiors, like Captain Evans, mistook his silence for uncertainty, his thoughtfulness for weakness. Evans was a man carved from regulations, his spine a stack of military code. He saw the world in terms of pass or fail, asset or liability. And in his eyes, Corporal Vance was a perpetual question mark, a variable he couldn't control. Today, that variable was under more pressure than ever. The air crackled with a unique tension, an anxiety that went beyond the normal rigors of a live-fire drill. 4-star General Marcus Thorne was on base. A living legend, a man whose portrait hung in halls where whispered rumors of his battlefield exploits were traded like currency. His visit was meant to be an inspection, a showcase of the unit's peak performance. For Captain Evans, it was a career-defining moment. For Leo, it was just another day to do his job right, to focus on the details others missed, to keep his squad safe. He checked the magazine on his rifle for the 3rd time, not out of nervousness, but out of habit. His gear was an extension of his body, every strap and buckle secured with practiced precision. He saw the tremor in a private's hand, the bead of sweat tracing a line down a sergeant's temple. He saw everything. That was his gift, and his curse. Because in a world that demanded you act first and think later, seeing too much could get you into trouble. As Captain Evans delivered his final, blistering speech before the drill commenced, his words were all about perfection. General Thorne is not here to see excuses. He is here to see flawless execution. You are extensions of this core will. You are weapons. Do not fail me. Leo looked past the captain's fiery rhetoric and saw the sprawling, simulated urban environment they were about to enter. A ghost town of concrete and plywood, designed to mimic the unpredictable chaos of modern warfare. But even in a place designed for make-believe, Leo knew the dangers could become terrifyingly real. He pulled his helmet down, the familiar way to strange comfort, and took his position. He was ready to execute. But he was also ready to see. And he had no idea that what he was about to see would force him to make a choice that would either destroy his career or redefine the very meaning of a soldier's duty. The world erupted in a symphony of managed chaos. The signal was given, and the urban combat drill began. Explosions of harmless smoke powder billowed through the fabricated streets, the sharp, concussive crack of blank rounds echoing off the concrete facades of the training buildings. Leo Vance moved with a fluid grace that belied the heavy gear strapped to his body. He was the point man for his fire team, the first to breach every door, the first to face the unknown. His senses were on fire, his eyes scanning every shadow, his ears filtering the cacophony for the subtle sounds that signaled danger, the scuff of a boot, the click of a weapon. Captain Evans watched from the command post, his knuckles white as he gripped a pair of binoculars. On the screen beside him, drone footage showed Leo's team approaching Building Gamma. "Move, Vance, move," he muttered, as if his will alone could speed them up. Inside that building, another world existed, one entirely separate from the orchestrated warfare outside. Sarah Jenkins pushed a mop across the dusty linoleum floor of a small administrative office. At 62, her movements were slow but deliberate. She was a contract cleaner, part of the invisible army that kept the base running. She had been told the building would be clear until 1500 hours. Her watch showed 1430. To block out the incessant noise of the base, she wore a pair of old, foam-padded headphones, listening to a talk radio program that reminded her of her late husband. She was humming softly, lost in a memory, oblivious to the fact that she was now standing in the middle of a war zone. A communications breakdown, a simple scheduling error, had left her name off the final sweep list. She was a ghost in the system, and ghosts were about to meet soldiers. Leo's team stacked up outside the office door. The sergeant gave the signal. Leo kicked the door open, his rifle raised, his body a coiled spring of lethal readiness. Smoke from a flashbang simulator flooded the room, obscuring everything in a grey haze. Through the swirling fog, he saw a shape. A figure, turning towards the sound, a long object in their hands. Protocol screamed in his mind. Threat. Neutralize. React. His training, thousands of hours of it, took over. But in that split second, his eyes, his true sight, saw more. He saw the figure was small, frail. He saw the headphones. He saw the confused, terrified eyes of an old woman. The object in her hands was a mop. But she was turning, stumbling, her balance gone, her face slackening in a way that had nothing to do with the shock of their entry. In that same instant, the training in his muscles screamed subdue, but the memory in his soul screamed save. He didn't fire. He didn't even shout. He lunged. He closed the distance in 2 powerful strides, his body colliding with hers. It was not a tackle born of aggression, but a desperate, calculated maneuver to control her fall. To the observers outside, to the drone camera overhead, it looked brutal. A heavily armed Marine violently striking down a civilian. He hit her, and she crumpled to the floor beneath him. The impact was jarring, but he absorbed most of it, twisting his body to shield her head. The world went silent. The drill, the shouting, the gunfire, it all stopped. The only sound was the harsh rasp of Sarah's breathing and the frantic pounding of Leo's own heart. The silence was more deafening than the simulated explosions had ever been. A single, sharp whistle cut through the air, the universal signal for a real-world emergency. The drill was over. Reality had just crashed the party. Medics, their boots pounding on the pavement, swarmed towards Building Gamma. Captain Evans was already moving, his face a thundercloud of pure fury. He burst into the small office to a scene of utter disaster. His star corporal, Leo Vance, was kneeling on the floor over the still form of an elderly woman. The drone footage had already been relayed to the command post where General Thorne stood, his arms crossed, his expression hardening into granite. From every angle, it looked indefensible. A catastrophic failure of judgment, of discipline, of everything the Marine Corps stood for. Vance! On your feet! Evans' voice was a raw, guttural roar that echoed in the small room. But Leo didn't move. He didn't even seem to hear him. His focus was entirely on Sarah. His helmet was off, tossed aside, and his hands hovered over her, not touching, but assessing. He saw the faint bluish tinge around her lips, the terrifyingly shallow rise and fall of her chest. This was more than a fall. This was something he had seen before, in another room, a long time ago. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful, of his mother, her hand clutching her chest, her eyes wide with a confusion that broke his heart. "I said on your feet, Corporal!" Evans bellowed, grabbing Leo's shoulder and hauling him up. The sudden movement broke Leo's concentration. He stumbled back, his eyes still locked on the woman. "Sir, she needs help," Leo said, his voice strained. "Something's wrong with her." "It's not just the fall." Evans shoved him towards the door. "You're damn right something's wrong. You assaulted a civilian during a high-level inspection. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The medics pushed past them, their professionalism a stark contrast to Evans' apoplectic rage. They began working on Sarah, their voices a low, urgent murmur of medical terminology. Just then, General Marcus Thorne stepped through the doorway. The air in the room seemed to solidify. The 4 stars on his collar glittered under the harsh fluorescent lights, each one a testament to a lifetime of command. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over the scene, the medics, the terrified woman on the floor, the furious captain, and finally, the young corporal standing pale and shaken. The general's gaze was not angry. It was something far worse. It was cold, analytical, and filled with a profound, crushing disappointment. The perfect inspection was now a potential public relations nightmare, a stain on the corps, and it all seemed to lead back to the quiet, unassuming Marine standing before him. The perfect facade had been shattered, and now someone had to pay the price. Captain Evans saw his chance to contain the disaster, to pin the blame squarely where it seemed to belong. He stepped in front of Leo, effectively shielding him from the general's view, and snapped to attention. "General Thorne, sir. I take full responsibility. This corporal has acted recklessly and without discipline. He used excessive force on an unarmed, non-combatant civilian. There is no excuse. He is a disgrace to this uniform, and I will see to it that he is punished to the fullest extent of the law." Evans' words were a hammer, each one driving a nail into the coffin of Leo's career. He portrayed Leo as a panic-stricken rookie who lost control, a liability who had jeopardized the entire operation. He was drawing a clear line in the sand. This was an individual failure, not a systemic one. Leo stood there, the accusations washing over him. He wanted to shout, to explain, but his throat was tight. How could he articulate the flood of instinct and memory that had compelled him to act? How could he explain that the image of his mother's stroke, years ago, had superimposed itself over this stranger's face? He tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, that's not what happened. I thought she was in trouble before I ever reached her. I was trying to stop her from falling, not attack her." Evans scoffed, a short, ugly sound of derision. "Excuses, Vance. You were trained to de-escalate, to identify threats. You saw a cleaning lady with a mop and you took her down like she was a high-value target. It's over. You'll be lucky to avoid a dishonorable discharge and prison time through it all." General Thorne remained silent, a statue of authority. He listened to Evans' tirade, his eyes never leaving Leo. He was a student of men, and he had learned long ago that the loudest voice in the room was often the most insecure. He saw the desperation in Evans' posture, the frantic need to assign blame. Then he looked at Leo. He saw no defiance, no anger. He saw a deep, gnawing concern. The corporal wasn't looking at the captain, or even at the general. His gaze kept flicking back to the medics working on Sarah, his brow furrowed with genuine worry. It was a detail, a small crack in the official narrative that Evans was so desperately trying to build. A guilty man would be focused on the consequences to himself. A worried man was focused on the well-being of another. The general had built his career on noticing such details. He had led men into battle not just by reading maps, but by reading faces. And the face of Corporal Leo Vance was not telling the same story as Captain Evans' words. The medics finally stabilized Sarah enough to move her. As they lifted the stretcher, one of them called out, "We need to know exactly what happened. Did she hit her head when she fell?" Before Leo could answer, Evans stepped in. The corporal knocked her down. "That's all you need to know," but Leo's voice cut through, clear and steady for the first time. "I broke her fall. I tried to shield her head. But check her left side. Her face was drooping before she went down. She couldn't control her left arm." The lead medic paused, his eyes locking with Leo's for a moment, a flicker of understanding passing between them. He gave a sharp nod and they hurried out of the building. The room was now empty, save for the 3 men. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. Evans, confident he had control, turned to the general. "Sir, I'll have the MPs escort the corporal to the brig immediately." It was at that moment that General Thorne finally moved, and finally spoke. The authority that had been held in reserve was now unleashed, not in a shout, but in a voice as quiet and sharp as a razor. "Captain Evans," he said, the words cutting through the tension. "That's enough." The captain froze, his mouth slightly agape. He had expected commendation for his swift action, not a rebuke. The general took a step forward, closing the distance until he was standing directly in front of the young corporal. He ignored the captain completely, his entire focus narrowing on the man at the center of the storm. He looked at the name stitched above Leo's pocket. Vance, it wasn't a question. It was an invitation. "Tell me everything," General Thorne said, his voice low but resonant, a command that could not be disobeyed. "Not what Thorne gestured dismissively towards Evans, thinks happened. Not what the drone footage shows. Tell me what you saw. What you felt. From the moment you breached that door. Leave nothing out." For the first time since the incident began, someone was asking Leo for his truth. He took a shaky breath, the weight of the 4 stars on the general's shoulders pressing down on him, yet in Thorne's eyes, he saw not a judge, but a man genuinely seeking to understand. So he spoke. He described the smoke, the confusion, the training protocols screaming in his head. Then his voice softened as he described what he truly saw. "Sir, it wasn't just a person in the room. It was the way she was standing. She was unsteady before we even came in. When she turned, it wasn't a normal reaction. It was slow, uncoordinated. Her left arm, it was just hanging there. And her face," Sir Leo paused, swallowing hard as the memory flooded back. "The left side of her mouth was drooping. Her eyes had this vacant look. A look of confusion, not just fear." Captain Evans tried to interject. "Sir, with all due respect, these are just self-serving justifications." General Thorne didn't even turn his head. He simply raised a single finger, and Evans fell silent, his face flushing with humiliation. "Continue, Corporal," Thorne commanded. Leo's gaze became distant, as if he were seeing it all again. "I've seen that look before, sir. My mother, she had a massive stroke a few years back. I was the one who found her. It was the same look. The same slackness in her face. The same dead weight in her arm. My training told me to neutralize a potential threat. But everything else inside me, every part of me that remembered my mom on that kitchen floor, it was screaming that this woman was dying." He looked directly into the general's eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "I didn't hit her, sir. I caught her. I knew if she fell backward, she would hit her head. People in that state, they can't protect themselves. I had to push her forward, onto her stronger side, and use my own body to cushion the fall. It might have looked violent, sir. But I swear on my life, I was just trying to keep her from dying right there on that floor." The room was utterly still. Leo had laid his career, his freedom, and his honor bare. He had confessed not to a crime, but to an act of profound, desperate empathy, an act born from personal tragedy. General Thorne listened, his expression unreadable, but his mind was racing. He was a man of strategy, of calculated risks. And he was being presented with 2 conflicting reports. One from a captain, based on video evidence and protocol. The other from a corporal, based on something intangible, instinct, memory, and a deep, gut-wrenching humanity. The general knew which one was harder to fake. He turned to his aide, a young major who had been standing silently by the door. "Major, get to the base hospital. I want a full report on that woman's condition. Not from the medics, from the attending neurologist. I want to know everything. And I want to know it 10 minutes ago." The aide nodded and disappeared. Thorne then turned back to Leo and Evans. "We will wait." The silence that followed was a battlefield of its own, each man fighting a different war. Evans fought to control his rising panic. Leo fought to control his trembling hands. And General Thorne fought to reconcile the warrior's code with the simple, undeniable power of human compassion he had just witnessed. While they waited, the general's gaze remained fixed on Leo, but his questions changed. He was no longer investigating an incident, he was investigating a man. "Where are you from, Corporal Vance?" he asked, his tone softer now, conversational. "Omaha, Nebraska, sir," Leo replied, surprised by the question. "Your mother," Thorne continued, treading carefully. "You were her caregiver." Leo nodded, the memories making his voice thick with emotion. For 2 years, sir. After the first stroke, she was paralyzed on her left side. I learned everything. How to help her eat, how to move her, how to recognize the signs. The doctors taught me what to look for. The subtle things. A slight slur in speech, a change in gait, the way one eye might not track with the other. They called them tears e mini-strokes. She had them all the time. He wiped a hand across his face, a gesture of profound weariness. It becomes a part of you, sir. You start seeing it everywhere. You watch people in a crowd, and you can't help but look for the signs. It's like learning a new language. A language of sickness. Captain Evans shifted his weight, uncomfortable. This was not military debriefing, it was something far more personal. He saw his clean, simple narrative of incompetence being muddied by messy, human details. He saw his authority, and the very regulations he worshipped, being undermined by a corporal's sob story. But General Thorne was captivated. He saw past the soldier and saw the son. He saw a young man whose life had forged in him a skill set more valuable than any marksmanship award. A battlefield awareness that extended beyond enemy combatants to include the vulnerable, the suffering, the very people they were sworn to protect. So when you entered that room, Thorne stated, piecing it together, you weren't just seeing a potential threat according to your training. You were seeing a specific medical crisis according to your life. Yes, sir, Leo breathed. That's exactly it. The two things happened at once. My body was reacting to the drill, but my mind was back in that kitchen with my mom. I knew, sir. I just knew. The words hung in the air, a testament to a truth that no camera could ever capture. The truth of experience, of love, of loss. It was a truth that defied protocol, a truth that could not be written in any field manual. General Thorne felt a shift within himself. He had spent 40 years in the service, climbing the ladder, mastering the arts of war and logistics and politics. But he had become disconnected from the raw humanity of the young men and women under his command. He saw them as strategic assets, their lives measured in readiness reports and deployment schedules. Corporal Vance, in the span of 10 minutes, had reminded him that the heart of the Corps was not its weapons or its regulations, but the character of its people. And the character of this young man was proving to be extraordinary. Just then, the general's aide reappeared in the doorway, his face pale, a folder clutched in his hand. He walked briskly to the general and spoke in a low, urgent voice, but in the small, quiet room, every word was audible. The aide's voice was tight with disbelief as he delivered the report from the hospital. Sir, the woman's name is Sarah Jenkins. She's 62. The doctors, they confirmed it. She suffered a massive ischemic stroke. The neurologist said the onset would have been just moments before Corporal Vance's team entered the room. He paused, taking a deep breath before delivering the most critical piece of information. They said the timing was a miracle. The stroke was in her brainstem. If she had been left alone, if she had simply collapsed on her own, the prognosis would have been catastrophic. Permanent disability or worse. He looked from the report to Leo, his expression a mixture of awe and shock. But there's more, sir. The neurologist was very clear on this point. A fall backward from a standing height during a brainstem stroke would have almost certainly caused a fatal secondary injury. A basilar artery dissection or a severe concussion to the brainstem. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. His action, what he did, the doctors are calling it an unorthodox but medically perfect intervention. By propelling her forward and controlling the descent, he prevented her head from snapping back. He saved her life. Not only that, by initiating a code blue situation, he got her to the stroke unit within the golden hour. They were able to administer a TPA drug that has already begun to reverse the effects. They're saying she's expected to make a near-full recovery. A heavy, profound silence descended upon the room. The truth, when it finally arrived, was more stunning and more absolute than anyone could have imagined. Leo's act of perceived violence was, in fact, an act of life-saving grace. The collision that threatened to end his career had instead saved a woman's life. The moment was a perfect, crystalline vindication. Captain Evans' face had drained of all color. His jaw worked silently, his entire rigid worldview having been dismantled in a matter of seconds. He looked at Leo, not with anger or suspicion anymore, but with a dawning, horrified understanding of how wrong he had been. He hadn't just misjudged a situation, he had been on the verge of destroying a hero. General Thorne closed his eyes for a moment, letting the full weight of the revelation settle over him. When he opened them, they were clear and sharp, and they were fixed on Captain Evans. His voice was no longer analytical or questioning. It was the voice of a 4-star general passing judgment, and it was as cold and hard as steel. "Captain," he began, each word a precisely aimed shot. "You stood in this room and you told me Corporal Vance was a disgrace. You told me he was reckless. You were ready to court-martial him, to ruin his life, to throw him in the brig." He took a step closer to Evans, his towering presence seeming to shrink the captain. "You saw a violation of protocol. You saw a smudge on your precious inspection report. You saw a threat to your career. But what you failed to see was a human being in distress. What you failed to see was a Marine acting with more courage, more instinct, and more honor than I have seen in a decade." He pointed a finger at Leo. "This corporal, the one you were so quick to condemn, did not see a target. He did not see an obstacle. He saw a person. He used his own pain, his own history, to save a life. Tell me, Captain, which of you was truly upholding the values of the Marine Corps in this room today?" Evans swayed slightly, as if the words themselves were physical blows. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Humiliation and shame radiated from him in palpable waves. Finally, he managed to stammer, "Sir, I was wrong. I apologize." General Thorne's expression was unrelenting. "Your apology is irrelevant. You have demonstrated a catastrophic failure of leadership. You lead from a manual, not from the heart. You manage soldiers, you do not lead them. You are dismissed, Captain. Report to my aide. We will be having a very long conversation about your future, or lack thereof, in my Marine Corps." Evans seemed to crumble, the air leaving his body. He gave a weak, defeated nod, turned, and walked out of the room, a man utterly broken by a truth he had refused to see. The general then turned to Leo, and the hardness in his face dissolved, replaced by a look of profound respect and admiration. He walked over and placed a heavy, paternal hand on Leo's shoulder. "Corporal Vance," he said, his voice now filled with a warmth that seemed to fill the entire room. "You have an instinct that we cannot teach. You have a sight that goes beyond the battlefield. In a world that is training soldiers to be more like machines, you have reminded us that our greatest strength will always be our humanity." He squeezed Leo's shoulder gently. "You didn't fail today, son. You set a new standard." 3 weeks later, the sun glinted off the polished brass of the medal pinned to Corporal Leo Vance's chest. He stood tall on a parade ground, not in disgrace, but in full dress blues. The Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal was presented to him by General Marcus Thorne himself, in front of the entire base. The citation spoke of his extraordinary situational awareness, decisive action, and profound compassion in the face of a critical medical emergency. Captain Evans was nowhere to be seen. He had been quietly reassigned to a desk job in a forgotten corner of the Pentagon. But the most important ceremony for Leo did not happen on the parade ground. It happened in the quiet, sterile hallway of the base hospital. He stood awkwardly, holding a small bouquet of flowers, outside Sarah Jenkins' room. She was sitting up in a chair by the window, her recovery progressing at a rate the doctors called astonishing. When she saw him, her face broke into a wide, beautiful smile. Her speech was still slightly slurred, but her eyes were bright and full of life. "You're the one," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the young man who saved me." Leo felt a blush creep up his neck. "I was just doing my—" "No," she interrupted, her gaze firm. "Don't you dare say you were just doing your job. I've worked on this base for 15 years. I'm the lady who mops the floors. People look through me. They see the uniform I wear, the bucket I carry, but they don't see me. You?" She pointed a finger at him, her hand trembling slightly. "In the middle of all that noise and smoke, in the middle of a war game, you saw me. You were the only one who really saw that I was in trouble. Tears welled in her eyes and in his. In that moment, the medal felt like a piece of tin compared to the gratitude shining in this woman's face. He had saved her life, and in doing so, she had validated his entire existence, validating the quiet, observant boy who had felt invisible for so long. The story of Corporal Vance did not end there. General Thorne, true to his word, was a changed man. He saw the systemic flaw that Captain Evans represented, a culture that prioritized procedure over people. He initiated a sweeping change in training doctrine. A new program was developed, focused on what he called a human-centric situational awareness. It taught soldiers not just to identify threats, but to recognize signs of civilian distress, medical emergencies, and fear. It was about seeing the whole battlefield, the human terrain, not just the enemy positions. And the program was officially named the Vance Protocol. Corporal Leo Vance, the quiet boy from Omaha, was asked to help design the curriculum. He was no longer a ghost in the ranks. He had found his voice, becoming an instructor, traveling to other bases to share his story, to teach other soldiers how to truly see. He had moved from obscurity to a position of influence, his quiet strength now a beacon for a new kind of warrior. So we come back to the beginning. What does it mean to see? It means looking beyond the surface. It means understanding that the most important skills we possess are often not the ones we are taught in a classroom, but the ones forged in the fires of our own lives, in our own hardships and heartaches. Corporal Vance's strength wasn't just his Marine training, it was the love for his mother. General Thorne's wisdom wasn't just from his rank, it was from his willingness to stop and listen to the lowest-ranking man in the room. And Sarah's value wasn't in her job, it was in her inherent humanity, a humanity that one person finally took the time to see. Our world is full of Corporal Vances, people with hidden strengths born from their private struggles. It is full of Sarahs, people who feel invisible, waiting for just one person to acknowledge their existence. And it is full of Captain Evanses, people who are so blinded by rules and biases that they cannot see the truth standing right in front of them. The choice of who we become is up to us. So the next time you encounter someone, whether it's the person serving your coffee, the janitor in your office, or a subordinate in your charge, remember this story. Take one extra second. Look past the uniform, past the name tag, past the role they are playing. Try to see the person. Because you never know when a single moment of true sight can change a life, or even save one. Share this story if you believe that compassion is the greatest form of courage. And in the comments below, tell us about a time when someone truly saw you, and how it made all the difference.